What is going on, gunfighters? Aspiring gunfighters, boys and girls of all ages, welcome to the podcast, Gunfighter Life, where we talk about guns, gunfighting tactics, ballistics the right way, with God at the center, Judeo-Christian values, and real-world, first-hand experience. I am your host, Michael Milito. I'm going to do a rapid-fire bio. This is off the cuff. First and foremost, I'm a Christian, a servant of God, a follower of Jesus Christ. Been a professional gunfighter most of my adult life. What does that mean? U.S. Marine Corps combat veteran, couple of tours overseas. Served in both the U.S. Marine Corps and the U.S. Army with full-time and part-time National Guard. Primary MOS in both was infantry, served in law enforcement, LAPD, worked some regular assignments, some more specialized assignments, FBI firearms instructor, a bunch of other certifications with three-letter government agencies, have been and continue to be for different organizations, and that's all I'm going to say, specific as I'm going to get, a private security contractor. And that's what I'm doing at the moment, as well as the podcast. In fact, I picked up some extra shifts this week because somebody requested some time off. So I have gotten up at 3-something in the morning the last couple of days, and it's about to be sunset, and I am just now driving up into the mountains because it is deer season eve, and I'm driving up, God willing, to slay some beasts. Been a lifelong hunter, been a professional big game hunter and guide. Probably missed some things in there, but in a nutshell, that's some bona fides for why I do the show. To spread knowledge onto you, not because I post a bunch of cool guns on the gram, not because I'm sponsored by a bunch of big gun companies, but because I've been blessed with real-world first-hand experience, and I try to pass that on. Let's get into the topic du jour. That's the topic of the day. That sounds good. I think I'll have that. We're going to talk about guns to get before the election. Now, I'm not a chicken little sky is falling kind of guy, but if Kamala Harris... Little side note here, I'm tired, so I'm going to go off a bunch of rabbit holes today. I thought Kamala Harris this whole time was spelled like C-A-M. It's spelled with a K. Who knew? Not me, because I don't have a TV, I don't have the news, and I live off-grid, and such is the life of a gun-for-hire, nomadic, traveling, private security contractor and podcaster. I had no idea till the other day, till like yesterday, that it's spelled with a K. So there we go. But if Kamala Harris is that how you say it? Kamala? If that's the next president of the United States, and I'm not saying I want that, I'm just saying it's a possibility, right? I don't care who you are, you should admit that it's a possibility. If that is the case, might there be some issues getting guns and ammunition and magazines and things like that? I think that's totally feasible, not a chicken little sky is falling. Now, I hope that's not the case. But why not hedge our bets if we see a storm rolling in, right? If we get a storm warning advisory, should we not be like, maybe I pick up some more bottled water? If we see something like this coming, should we not be like, maybe I pick up some more PMags, right? So that's the idea. Now, first of all, I'm going to say, if you don't have enough ammo or you don't have a decent backstock of ammo in case things dry up so you can continue to train and have your mags loaded, then do that. If you don't have decent standard capacity magazines, maybe pick those up. But today's podcast du jour is specifically about guns to get. Guns to get before the election. Number one is going to be a very high-end AR. A Daniel Defense or a Colt LE6920, or pick your model. But a top-tier, high-end AR-15. Like a Daniel Defense, Mark 12, whatever it is, right? You could pick your own model, but a Daniel Defense or Colt, like a creme de la creme. If there is an assault weapons ban 2.0, just like people used to say, is that a pre-ban? You've got a pre-ban. Imagine when we're 5 years into assault weapons ban 2.0, if you will. Imagine that Twilight Zone. And somebody's like, is that a pre-ban Daniel Defense Mark 12? Kind of like somebody would say, is that a 69 Shelby Cobra? And you're like, yup, sure is. Got her back when I listened to Gunfighter Life back in 2024. They'll be like, dang, that's sweet, or that's cool, or that's bussin', or whatever they're going to be saying in 5 years, right? I don't know. I don't even know if they say bussin' anymore. That was the next hot thing I learned from some kid when I was visiting my wife's family in Florida. Do they still say bussing? Maybe they've moved on to something else. Maybe it's trucking. But let's keep on trucking on this podcast. So a top tier AR-15, because that's the low-hanging fruit, right? They're going to be like, it's an assault weapon. Let's ban the feces out of it. Let's ban that thing. So low-hanging fruit. If you don't have a top tier one, that's going to be my number one. My number two is a backup AR-15. And you might think, why? Well, if you have that Daniel Defense pre-ban Mark 12 or whatever it is, Mark 18, or if you have that, you might want to keep it pristine. You might want something else to beat up and run through the mud and, bleed on and sweat on and put a bunch of rounds through and wear out. For that, or if that's what you can afford right now, a Palmetto State Armory or a Delton. That'd be my two, since I gave you two creme de la creme choices, they'll be my two budget choices. Daniel Defense, Delton is a budget option, and PSA, Palmetto State Armory. I saw some the other day on their daily deals, full build, $399, and that's post-COVID money. That was like a day or two ago when I saw that. Right? What do you think, if that's banned, what do you think that's going to be worth? So a cheap AR that you can train with, run, I got nothing against a PSA AR. Is it a Daniel Defense? No, don't be like, oh, it's just as good as a Daniel Defense for $400. It's not, but it's still good, and it's still definitely, even if there is no ban, worth $400. So it's a good buy either way, and I think everybody ought to have a decent training AR. If you have room for a second AR, have one that you're gonna just run, hard, put away, run hard and put away wet. So that's my second choice, a budget AR. The third choice is going to be a decent standard capacity modern semi-auto handgun. Polymer striker fires are a dime a dozen. So if I'm giving you two options for this, I'm going to pick a Beretta 92. Like, oh, is that a pre-ban Beretta 92? Like they had in the war? Like, yep, it sure is. I just think it's one of the finest combat handguns ever made. Get one before they're banned, if they are banned. A Beretta 92 is a fine choice. I prefer single action only for a carry gun. If it's a combat handgun or an apocalypse handgun, double single action is fine. Just a Beretta 92F or a 92A1 or pick your flavor, right? Like Baskin Robbins. There's a bunch of different flavors of the 92. But something in that family is a fine handgun. My other option for this is going to be get a 320. I said polymer striker fires are a dime a dozen, but the thing about that is it's modular. The 320 is a chassis system. That's one of the big claims to fame. The chassis, the serialized part, pops in and out. So if you're not really sure what you're going to get, I would say get an M17, which is the 320 variant. But it has a safety, and safeties are silly, and they're, for some reason, you can remember to use it, a thumb safety that sweeps down on an AR-15 in combat, but you'll never, ever remember it for concealed carry. Safeties are silly. I disagree with that tactical consensus. I didn't concede to that, and I don't concede to that. I like a manual safety. I think it favors the trained individual. So I like that. But if you get an M17, you don't want it. They make just a little pin that you can put in there, I believe, and just take the safety out, and it'll just be like a 320 without the safety. So you could go either way. It gives you the option. But the M17, since it is the military's handgun, that kind of gives us some clout. And if they ban those, that's a good thing to have. And since the serialized part is the chassis, if you're like, oh, I've got the full-size, M17, but I want a subcompact, you can make it a subcompact. If you want a long slide competition version, you can make it that. If you want to turn it into a pistol brace conversion thing, which is a quasi PCC PDW, like a personal defense weapon, shoulder with the arm brace thing. If you want to do that, you can do that with the chassis system, because that whole serialized piece comes in and out. So if you're like, you know what, I thought I wanted this a couple years ago and I can't get a new high capacity gun, but I can convert this to whatever I want. that's why that would be my second choice for a decent regular capacity semi-automatic handgun in 2024. Now, there's plenty of other ones if you decide that you want to get an HK P30 or an HK VP9. We can still be friends. That's cool. There's nothing wrong with those guns. If you decide that you don't care at all about looks, you're not superficial at all, you don't care about looks, you like ugly guns, then you can go with a Glock. You get a Glock frame, right? And they're not as modular. You're kind of stuck with that frame size. But there's a lot you can do with the Glock 19 or Glock 17 frame as well. So I'll throw that in there as an honorable mention. I wouldn't tell you to get a Glock unless you're just that guy, unless you're a dyed-in-the-wool Glock guy. But I don't know why in 2024 you would get a Glock over a 320 system. I just don't. Worse trigger pull, worse ergonomics. In case you just like Glocks, then if you want to get a Glock frame, get a Glock frame. I would encourage you at this point, if we're talking about ones to get before the election, don't get the little, fad guns of the micro 9s. Get a full size, get something that takes full size magazines, because that's one of the cool things about the Glock is all those magazines. If you get a full size one, they'll kind of interchange. I'm talking of the regular double stack Glock magazines, the little baby #MeToo micro 9s. They're not that way. They've got proprietary magazines. So I would say don't even mess with those. Hopefully that fad, once they, it's kind of one of those fads the gun industry, I think, tries to milk you and be like, ooh, micro 9s are so hot right now. And then once they've milked you and you're dry and you're tired of the micro 9, be like, ooh, you know what? Full size handguns are way easier and better to shoot and better in almost every way. And then they'll milk you again for those. And then they'll be like, oh, but a compact somewhere in the middle, so let's milk you for that. But I think the micro 9 thing is a fad. Be a man and carry a full-size handgun if you can. So that would be my recommendation. Get a full-size, regular capacity, semi-automatic handgun before the election. The next one I'm going to tell you to get is some kind of full-powered battle rifle. And the main battle rifle is kind of thing in forums. It's not really something that's really referred to as that in military or law enforcement circles. That's kind of an internet forum kind of thing, if internet forums are still a thing. But a full-powered, semi-automatic, box magazine-fed, shoulder-fired, standard capacity weapon. As in an AR-10 variant, the Ruger SFAR is a good choice. The Ruger SFAR, or if you really like the M1As, again, what's a pre-ban M1A going to be worth? Because people love those M1As. They have that kind of really dedicated following. So if you want an M1A, with standard capacity magazines, now might be the time to get an M1A. They're a bit heavy. They're a bit old school, but if that's what you want, now might be a time to get one. If you've always wanted one and you have the money for it, don't be irresponsible and put it on credit card or something. But if you've got the money for one and you've been eyeballing one, an AR-10 or a M14 or M1A for civilians, now might be a good time to get one and get some spare magazines for it. The other thing that I would say to look at, if you have the money, they are expensive. The SCAR 17 is, in my opinion, like the gold standard. So what do you think a SCAR 17 is going to be worth if you can't get SCAR 17s anymore? It's a lot easier, again, to go for the low-hanging fruit. If they're like, anything made before this date is grandfathered in, but anything made after this date is not cool, like they did with the first assault weapons ban, then, or any regular capacity magazine made after November 2024 has to be stamped, and it's restricted law enforcement only. If you're old enough to remember the first ban, you'll remember those magazines that circulated around law enforcement only. So something to consider. If again, the gold standard, but very expensive, the SCAR 17. If you want to go old school, the M1A, the kind of what is probably the most practical choice in 2024 is an AR-10 variant. And of course, you'll probably realize that I'm leaving one out. All the comm block guys are screaming, yet what about the AK-47? Yeah, that's the next one I'm going to talk about. AK-47 variants, they're not as cheap as they once were. But again, if they get banned, and they likely will be right behind the AR-15, they're kind of seen as the evil enemy adversary rifle. And I'm not saying that's right or wrong. I'm just saying it is, right? So if you want an AK variant, now might be the time to get them. Buyer beware. Just because it looks like an AK does not mean it's got that legendary AK reliability. I would say, the days of cheap, good AKs are gone. Now you can kind of pick and choose. Do you want a cheap AK or do you want a good AK? Kind of my top pick, if you consider it an AK, and I do, the Galil. Get the new Galil Ace in whatever flavor you want. Get it in 308. Get it in the old school 7.62x39. Get it in 223. I don't think it's heretical. If you want an AK in 223, that, the days of the giant, spam cans of cheap com block surplus are kind of gone. So it makes a lot of sense in today's market to get one in 5.56. The Galil Ace is my number one recommendation. They're a bit heavy, but AKs kind of tend to be. But there's some really good options in the Galil Ace lineup. I actually prefer the Gen 1, so if you can find a used Gen 1, you might look at it, assuming they didn't fire corrosive ammo through it and not clean it. It's probably a decent buy, but the Galil Ace is a good option. And some of the other options, I don't have any experience with the Palmetto State Armory AKs. I do with their ARs. I don't know if their AKs are decent or not. But their ARs are pretty decent. So you might want to consider stocking up on an AK if that's what you can afford and you've always wanted one. Again, the cheap and good AK days, I think, are mostly over. You can get a good AK, but you're going to pay for it. You can get a cheap AK, and you kind of roll the dice. But if you want an AK and you've got the money for one, now might be a good time. Getting a couple of good magazines. AK magazines are not as cheap as AR magazines. Those are crazy affordable right now, even with COVID-flation. They're crazy affordable. So you might consider picking up some good AK magazines. Again, because if you have an AK and you got to run it with a 9-round magazine or whatever, the new band's going to be 7 rounds or whatever, kind of takes a lot of the teeth out of the AK. So get some decent magazines, maybe get some of the old military surplus magazines, and then get some of the newer AK magazines. Again, they're not as cheap as, it's not as cheap to get a good AK magazine. There's cheap AK magazines and there's good AK magazines, but consider stockpiling on those. And again, I don't know what the future holds. They may just ban magazines. They may ban any gun, post, whatever is banned if it takes high-capacity magazines and you're grandfathered in. I don't know. It'd be pretty far down the rabbit hole to think they're going to go door-to-door and confiscate guns. That's why I'm saying maybe get them now if you've always wanted them. But, I mean, I don't see the future. I don't know what the future holds. I don't pretend to be a false prophet. But I could see, with the next election, that's definitely a possibility. And again, I don't want to be a chicken little skies falling kind of guy. Don't cash out a 401k. I'm not telling you to do that. I'm not telling you to put it on a credit card or go in debt. I'm saying if you have the money, now might be a good time to consider some of these things. And if you are considering them, I figured it would be a good idea to give you some of my top picks. So just consider it. Don't go crazy. Don't go into debt. Don't become a wage slave or a debt slave. But just consider if that were to happen. And if you do have those things, consider a little bit of ammo, because even if there's a proposed ban, people might freak out and buy a bunch of ammo, and it might be hard to get ammo. So if you've been thinking about stockpiling up on some more ammo, it's fairly available right now, and it's not crazy priced. But if there's some kind of big scare, it likely will be. So consider that. And again, PMags are crazy cheap. PMags, Amen 2, Lancer mags, any of the good AR magazines, they're very affordable right now. They're even on sale in some places. So look for a good deal and maybe stock up on some. And, if they do propose a 10-round ban, then buy some of the 10-rounders when they're available and beat those up for training and keep the good 30-round mags for your loadout. Just seems like a low-cost way to hedge your bets. So just consider that. If you don't have the money for an AR right now, maybe just get a lower or 2 or 3 so you can build an AR in the future, because they're probably, that's a serialized part. I don't think the politicians know enough about it to like ban barrels or things like that. They're probably going to ban the firearm, and the firearm is a serialized part. And thankfully, on the AR, that's one of the cheapest parts as far as like major components go. Right, like a lower is cheaper than a complete upper, or even than a lot of barrels. So consider getting a lower or two, even if there is no ban. You know, assuming you want to build an AR at some point in the future, even if you have one. If you want another one in the future, maybe consider having a spare lower. So just some thoughts, just some ideas there, guys. Those fire control units for the 320, if you don't have the money for the 320, they do sell those separate. So you could just buy a fire control unit. You could buy a complete like Glock lower. There's a lot of companies that make aftermarket Glock compatible frames, lowers. That's a serialized part. You could get one of those. There's several different companies that make them. Again, if you don't have the money for an entire other gun, so you might want to consider that. Just some thoughts, guys. Let's hope none of it happens and the guns continue to flow and the ammunition continues to be available. I hope that is the case. Your tactical verse of the day from the mouth of Jesus: let he who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one. Let he who has no sword sell his cloak and buy one. You will find that in the Gospel of Luke. Thanks for listening and have a blessed day.